We are often taught that a poem is a lightning strike, the result of a solitary genius waiting for a wave of pure inspiration to hit them out of nowhere. But that belief creates a psychological roadblock. When you feel you have to invent a completely original form for every single line, the pressure to be brilliant becomes overwhelming. You stare at the page and you freeze. There is a more practical way. You can actually manufacture a draft using a reliable, mechanical engine that prioritizes the construction of the sentence over the emotion of the writer. This is the core of parallel writing. In this method, the act of imposing a strict grammatical form actually happens before you write a single word of content. You aren't finding a form, you're choosing one. By treating grammar as a scaffold, the blank page is no longer a void. It is a set of specific slots you need to fill, making the act of writing a sequence of manageable structural moves. To use this engine effectively, you have to look past simple word repetition, or anaphora, and look at the underlying architecture. Anaphora is what we usually recognize. It's the rhetorical power of repeating the same word at the start of every sentence, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously did. True parallelism is broader. It means repeating an entire grammatical or rhetorical shape. You create a sturdy frame, and then you swap out the words and images, the payload, inside that frame for each new line. In this ancient Hebrew text scroll, parallelism was the primary organizing principle of poetry. These adjacent lines functioned like a mirror. The second line repeats the first line's exact grammatical structure to sharpen, contrast, or extend the idea. This same mechanical engine of repetition and extension appears here in this illuminated Latin manuscript. It is a foundational element of biblical prose and public rhetoric. Parallelism has survived for millennia because it is a reliable way to give language a memorable, audible shape. It makes a thought feel inevitable. In practice, drafting this way starts with a content dump. You choose a small, specific subject, like a room you haven't visited in years, or a single object on your desk. You list every noun, action, and sensory detail you can think of. Don't worry about being poetic yet. You are just gathering the raw material for the engine. Then you impose the pattern, locking in a grammatical frame to create a rigid vertical track. This is the echo and advance method. The first line slots in to establish the pattern and name your subject clearly. The second line matches that exact grammatical shape, but the content enlarges the concept. The third line echoes the syntax once more, using its payload of images to complicate the emotion or the scene. Finally, the fourth line mirrors the shape one last time to reveal the core meaning behind the sequence. Because the syntax repeats, you build momentum and pattern recognition. The reader knows the shape of the next line before they read it, which allows your changing imagery to carry the weight of the poem. There is a trap here. If every single line is identical for the entire poem, the structure stalls. It stops being a poem and starts feeling like a mechanical list. To move from a draft to a finished piece, you need variation inside consistency. This is where you decide which rules to keep and which to bend. Read your draft aloud. Use your ear to detect where the rhythm feels earned and where the repetition has started to go flat. The most important moment in a parallel poem is the break, the moment where you intentionally disrupt the established grammatical pattern to surprise the reader. Parallel writing proves that poetry doesn't have to be a mystery. It is language given a deliberate, audible shape. Once you have a scaffold, you have a place to start. Stop waiting for inspiration and start building your own structure. You can learn the full echo and advance method in Carol Jennifer Soars' course, Freeing Poetry from Definition, available on The Great Discovery.